Great, so now we're moving on to article writing. So once you've got your grant proposal and you've been to the field, you need to communicate your data to the rest of the scientific public. So we've got Professor Werner now from the University of Fort Hare joining us, and he is also at the Department of Geography. He's got over 1,000 citations, and his index on Google Scholar is 16. So he's got a H index of 16. Professor Werner, thank you very much for joining us. We are excited to hear from you.
Mandate from APECSSA was not necessarily to do a workshop on the nitty-gritty of article writing, but more also to talk around the periphery and the things that are important around the periphery of article writing and how one should handle that. But first of all, just bear with me. I am at home. I don't have a permit to be at the university. My housekeeper is there here today. There's monkeys on the roof, so the dogs are very unhappy. And to top it all off, of course, I've got a sick child trying to bust a fever in the room next door. So this all feeds wonderfully into my talk later today about how to deal with all of this. And so please stay tuned for that dog and pony show a bit later. But now let me quickly chat to you about article writing and the nuances regarding article writing. I do have some experience, and I think I've got more experience regarding what not to do than actually doing the right thing. So that maybe would be the angle that I wanted to go with, is to what actually not to do when it comes to article writing. So, all right, so when it comes to article writing, there's a couple of things to consider. And I think one of the most important things these days, and probably always been, is the abstract. And even though I said I'm not going to talk about too much about the nitty-gritty of article writing, I think it's very important to focus on one or two key things on article writing, and then for the way forward, what not to do. So the abstract, of course, is the pertinent overview of the work. And of course, you would say, yeah, we know this, doofus. The abstract is the what's happening in the article. But I think it's more than that. When you publish your article and you have, you know, the journal's nice little flowery inlays and logos, and your title is there, and the authors are all there, and then boom, there's the abstract. And the abstract is the banner. It's the poster for your work, for your article. And of course, you must remember that a lot of people in third world or developing countries don't have access to databases. They may be allowed only to download your abstract. And that is, in most cases, all they can read and see if it's worthwhile purchasing or trying to get hold of you to get your work. So an abstract is way more than that. And you may want to always, or if you don't agonize over your abstract, I think you're doing something wrong. You have to take your time looking at your abstract, agonizing over every sentence to make sure it's absolutely perfect. And then, and I'll talk a bit more about that. Okay, so abstracts differ, of course. Data papers abstract would be different. I'm going to focus on the abstract of data papers more. But if you maybe write a review paper, your abstract will look a bit different than the one I'm going to describe now. A review paper may have more intro to actually give it a bit context. Why am I writing this review paper? There's findings, of course, and you could maybe give more context. But I would like to rather talk about an abstract of a so-called data paper. And this is probably the paper that you will, no, this is the paper that you will, the kind of paper you will write the most. It's the data paper. It's the typical paper. I go out in the field, I collect my data, or I get secondary data from a source, and I write my paper. It's not a fancy, it could be fancy, but it's necessarily just the nitty-gritty, the quick and dirties that you would probably write for the rest of your career. All right, so first of all, background. So the first couple of sentences of your abstract should give the background. You place the question that you address in a broader context. And I've been working with a lot of people, and especially people from China and so forth, and this is not necessarily a part of their abstracts, and it doesn't make the abstract very good if there's no broader context. And always try to bring the context in as your first 2 sentences. Then, of course, your method would be the next step of your abstract. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences on the method. So if you get data, you can say your first sentence is, where did you get the data from? Or how did you collect your data? And then, of course, the second sentence could be the overview of the methods that you use. Don't have to go into nitty-gritty, but you may always want to say how I did get to the findings. And of course, you have your results. It's very important to actually put in your key results in your abstract. As many sentences as you can. We are very limited to words these days. 200 seems to be the norm with most journal articles that you have for the abstract. So you can't put in everything as broadly as you can or as you want to, but it's very important to put the key results into your abstract. And then, of course, you contextualize that in your conclusion, and you have to come out with a bombshell. The last sentence has got to be your bombshell. It's got to say why this is important. It's got to give it, if you submit it to an international journal, you've got to end with your bombshell. What is the main conclusion and the main context? The so what of your article is the last sentence of your abstract. As I've said before, an abstract is extremely, extremely important. There is a couple of pitfalls when it comes to abstract writing. Whatever is in the abstract must be in the body of the paper. Not everything that's in the paper will make it into the abstract, but whatever is in the abstract must be in the paper. And also, please, no exaggerations. The best abstracts are actually those that seems to have been written by somebody else. The best abstracts I've read is like that. So you have the paper, you have the nuances of the paper, you have the style of your paper, your writing style, and the abstract, if it seems like it's written by somebody else, in other words, you've given the paper to somebody and say, listen, write the abstract. Those abstracts, those objective abstracts that takes the paper for what it is and puts it down for what it is, are the best, or is the best abstracts that I have read before so far. Okay, one other thing I want to consider with the actual writing of a paper, and that is the discussion. That has been a pitfall of many students' work I've read, and many poor papers also. The discussion is the key of a good paper. Context is everything. How you put your findings in the context of, firstly, the internal workings of your paper. In other words, how does the different findings, the different dots that you have gotten from your data, how does that fit with each other? And how does that fit with previous work, previous findings from other people, other study sites that is the same as yours, or globally, the work that you want to put into a global context. So you have the internal context and the external context. And that is extremely important. And I found that a lot of young researchers, even myself, these also do the same mistake. You do not put your findings in the context of the broader literature. And of course, the main pitfall that I've seen from article writing is that the discussion is not a summary of the findings. The discussion is not there to rehash what the findings have been previously and summarize the findings. Don't do that. The discussion is purely there to put your findings in the context of internal context and your external context. Okay, so enough about article writing. Many of you have written articles before, better articles than what I can write or whatever. So that is I'm finishing with that, with some of the pitfalls and things to look out for when you write your article. So let's go to the more periphery of article writing. So there's a couple of tips that I would like to give to you with regards to article writing. And the first is, the worst articles are the cut and paste jobs. Absolutely, by far. If you do a cut and paste job from your thesis or your dissertation, it is the worst article to work with and to review. Don't think that because you've got a thesis or a dissertation, you can cut little bits and bobs off off your dissertation, and voila, you have a paper. Very few papers work that way. You will probably have to rewrite everything. Your intro, your methods could maybe be a cut and paste, but your findings and everything has got to be written with an article in mind. So do not think you can cut and paste and get a good article out of it. That article will need to be polished extensively, so much so that it's probably better to rewrite than to try and polish and saw away the edges on a paper that's been a cut and paste. When in doubt, leave it out. And that is extremely difficult for a lot of people. If it's not concise, if it's not pertinent to your paper, if it's some things on the periphery, leave it out. Papers must be concise, to the point, well contextualized. Do not waffle. And this is an important lesson, one that I have not yet learned myself. Lead balloons do not fly. If that little voice in your head or in your heart tells you this paper is not going to make it, it probably won't. Do not waste your time with lead balloons. I have wasted so much time, valuable writing time on papers that I just know will not make it. Especially in a journal that's not predatory or whatever, especially in a good journal. It's not going to make it. Do not waste your time. Know when to walk away from those kind of papers and just say, sorry, mates, especially if you're in a collaboration, I've tried my best. This is not going to go. Either the sample size is too small or the context is not there. The so what's not there. Do not waste your time. Do not write for yourself or your group. Write for the reviewer. I've seen this many times. You get so involved in your text and in your study that you think everybody else knows exactly what's going on. The reviewer doesn't. If you write something about Marion Island, it doesn't mean that anybody else that reads the paper will know what you are writing about regarding your island. Your study site, therefore, must be well put. Your methodology must be strong. You must write for the reviewer. You must always write with reading your work through an external's eyes. That's very, very important. But say what you want to say, man. Do not waffle. If a Ferrari is red, you say the Ferrari is red. It's not a vehicle with 4 wheels designed by Ferrari who has the color of the moonrise in a dusty desert. It's a red Ferrari, and say it's a red Ferrari. Do not convolute the sentences. And that is the next point. A paper, in essence, is a string of sentences, a couple of hundred sentences that are strung together to make your story. If you check each sentence by sentence, and your sentence is perfectly saying what you want to say, and the E's and R's and was and wers and everything, all the grammar is as best as you can put it, then the string of your sentences will make at least a well-written, easy, readable paper. And that goes a long way. A well-written paper goes a long way. You can have the best findings, the best things in the world, best context. If it's not well written, the reviewers do not like that. The journal I'm going to touch on a bit later, but also choose the journal and type of article carefully. Sometimes work of a limited extent can be put in as a short com, and that's no problem. Short com is cool. Sometimes the work doesn't allow you to have a big, massive paper. Then put it in as a short com. Always consider going for the least resistance. If you have a paper that you've got to pull and push and work to make it a full article, don't do it. The reviewers will see right through you. If it's small, concise, maybe the best way would be then to go for a short com if that journal allows it. So the frequently asked questions, therefore, is Okay, so what journal should I send it to then? Obviously, a journal that fits what your paper is about. Obviously, I don't even have to say that. But if it's a paper that is hardcore geohydrology or hardcore geophysics, or you changing the methods, and even if the polar aspect is your context, the Antarctica is your context, Marion Island is your context, but it's a hardcore physics journal, a physics article, then maybe send it to a geophysics journal. They will take it because your work has broader context for that theme. But if it's a general, generic paper that is multidisciplinary or that a lot of people would find interesting, then maybe a more multidisciplinary journal like Antarctic Science, Polar Research, and so forth would be more appropriate. Open access, sure. Do we have to pay page fees? Should we go for journals that ask page fees? Personally, I do not go to journals that ask page fees. For simply the matter is I don't have the money. And a lot of people don't have the bucks, and a lot of institutions don't pay page fees. But if your institution pay page fees, then by all means, rule of thumb is send it to the best journal you possibly can. ISI rated, best metrics, do it. Do it. It's easy to send it to a lower journal because you know the metrics is low, you will get it in. Sure. But believe me, it's always better to have that hardcore papers and have it into that hardcore journals. And for heaven's sake, stay away from predatory journals. Stay away from dodgy journals. It's not good for your career, and it's not good for your groups, and it's not good for your grant applications later because predatory journals will be picked up. So please avoid that. Should I go big or should I go home? What I mean by this is, should I write small little articles or should I write one big paper? This is a very difficult question. Sometimes it's best to lump everything together and just nail them with your nature or science or quartile one paper, quartile one journal, and you just nail them. Sometimes, especially if you're earlier in your career, it may be better to lump the findings together and write maybe 3 or 4 papers from your PhD, and it's all good papers, and you will get citations from those papers. And the thing with that is, if you've got one big paper or 4 smaller papers, if the person is doing work that you have that is your work is citable, you'll probably find that you'll cite all 4 papers of yours in any case, so you get 4 more citations. So if you want to play the game, maybe it's best to do smaller articles, but again, it's up to you and it's up to the group. There is pros and cons both sides. One big paper with big impact may suit you better in the long run for your career. So think about that. There's no right or wrong here, but again, please stay away from predatory or easy journals. It does not help you much. In what institution should I submit? This is especially for people that work at a certain institution but doing their PhDs at another. So what should I do? Should I write my name and then my affiliation as my PhD affiliation, or should I do it with affiliation of where I'm actually working? In the olden days, it was easy. Where you work is where you get your subsidy, it's where you get your money from, and you put it in there. These days, your intellectual property and institutional intellectual property is very, very important. And institutions do not like giving away their IP. So if you're a PhD student, even though you're working somewhere else, a lot of institutions will force you to put the institution's name of where you're doing your PhD, where are you getting your funding from, and so forth. Again, it's up to the institutional rules, and it's up to you and your supervisor to make that decision. In a lot of cases, if the paper has an author from the institution where you are doing your PhD, then you can always put your affiliation on there. But again, please be mindful of this. Sort it out with your supervisor and your institution. Who should be authors on my paper? Should I put everybody's name on? Should I go solo? Who should be the authors? Again, this is a massive pitfall. I have found that early in my career that to be generous goes a long way. That doesn't mean you put in the lab mate put your name on your paper of the lab mate who's made you coffee while you were working on the paper. By all means, no. But if somebody has made an academic contribution to your paper and your work, an academic contribution, not necessarily a contribution in the field or not necessarily support, but if it made an academic contribution, that person's name must be on your paper. And be generous. What comes around goes around. Be mindful of that. I can't handle the heat, so should I stay out of the kitchen? What I mean by this is a lot of students write a fantastic PhD. Out of the PhD, they go and work, and the papers never gets written. Am the supervisor, or is the supervisor allowed to take up that paper, write it as a first authorship? Some people say yes, you are allowed. If the student has given up the right to write that paper, then somebody else can step in. Some supervisors feel no. The intellectual property always lies with the student. So if the student does not write the paper gets unwritten. Again, please, you have to sort this out with your supervisor, and you have to be honest. If you cannot write the paper due to external pressures or that you could not give anything anymore, you could not worry about it anymore, advise your research group and say, please, I cannot do this. Somebody else must take over. And then you are giving up your right as first author, and the supervisor will then step in if they are keen to do that and take over. This is not so much a question as a statement. My supervisor sucks. I cannot work with him, and when it comes to paper writing, my paper lies on his desk. He doesn't seem to be interested in working on the paper. What should I do? Well, first of all, ask yourself the question. That paper that I've put on his desk, is it the best job that I could have possibly done? Remember, supervisors are human, and they always take the path of least resistance. So if the paper sucks, don't think the supervisor is going to put all of the time that he has to put in to get it right. He may just give up, given the pile of other things that they have to do. So please, if you write a paper and the supervisor is the co-author and you send it to the co-author, make sure that it's the best paper that you could have possibly, or that you've written it in the best possible way. I promise you, those things will be the low-hanging fruit and it will go through. But again, if your supervisor is difficult, that's your problem and you'll have to deal with it. Being honest and being true to the supervisor and to yourself will go a long way. And then lastly, and I want to end with this, is that reviewers suck. Yes, sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. And you've got to remember that reviewers of your paper are human and they do not know you. So their comments, in most cases, they don't know you. And their comments are not personal attacks on your being. It's not an attack of your soul, of who you are. It may be an attack on the crap that you've written. Yes. Or it may be there to help you understand to do this better. Reviewers tend to do, again, like supervisors, path of least resistance. If it's a well-written paper, it will possibly, in most cases, go through. Reviewers are, in the most cases, are there to make the paper better. And one has to take the reviewer's comments for what it is. I know I was being the same. You take your work very, very personally. You put everything that you have in it, and then you get the reviewer's comments back, and it's doom and gloom. Think past that. Work through that. Get over it and write and fix the paper. Fix the paper. Always fix the paper. Don't let the paper lie and stew over it and worry and have sleepless nights about the reviewers' comments. Fix it. Get over it. Do it. Submit it. Resubmit it. It's just a paper. And that's the most important thing. And that is what I'm going to end with for my talk a bit later this afternoon. And I hope you can join me. It's just a paper. It's not the end of the world. And one has always to keep that in mind and to have context. Thank you.